Queen Camilla walked straight past the dignitaries, past her own aides, and stopped in front of the royal guard. "Salute your queen," she ordered. But the guard completely ignored her, didn't so much as even blink. And when she pushed harder in front of the whole courtyard, his reply didn't just stop her cold. Jigget, it brought up a name she never expected to hear again. Now, before we show you exactly what happened, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, because what you're about to see will leave you speechless. The afternoon that would change everything began like any other ceremonial duty at Buckingham Palace. February air hung sharp and still over London, the kind of cold that cuts through wool coats and makes tourists huddle closer together behind the rope barriers. The sky was gray steel, heavy with the weight of winter and secrets that had been buried too long. The wind was sharp enough to make the Union Jacks snap like whips against their poles, and tourists huddled together behind the rope barriers, phones already out, hoping to catch something worth posting. It wasn't a major state occasion, just a formal welcome for some diplomatic envoy. But even the smallest royal ceremonies draw crowds. There's something magnetic about watching tradition unfold with clockwork precision. When the history books are written about this day, they'll mark it as the moment when 27 years of silence finally broke. When one man's refusal to salute became an earthquake that shook the very foundations of the British monarchy. Staff Sergeant Adrian Cole stood at the eastern edge of the forecourt like he'd been carved from the same stone as the palace behind him. 41 years old, tall and lean beneath that imposing black bare skin that added another foot to his height. His scarlet tunic was pressed so sharp, you could have cut paper on the creases, every brass button catching the pale light like tiny mirrors. But here's what the tourists snapping photos didn't know about the man in the ceremonial uniform. Cole had earned his stillness in places where moving at the wrong moment could get you killed. He'd stood checkpoint duty in Afghan, where the silence between heartbeats might be the only warning you got. He'd maintained position during mortar strikes in the Balkans, refusing to abandon his post until every civilian in his sector was clear. And there was something else the crowd couldn't know. In 1919, during his early service with the Household Division, Cole had been part of the discreet security detail assigned to Princess Diana during her final months. Not the obvious protection you'd see in photographs, but the kind that stayed in shadows, watching for threats that might come from unexpected directions. He'd been there the night she returned from that last trip to Paris, had seen the fear in her eyes that the newspapers never reported, had heard her quiet conversation with her private secretary about people who smile while they plan your disappearance. She'd pulled him aside that night, her voice barely above a whisper. "Adrian, if something happens to me, if there's an accident or I suddenly decide to retreat from public life, remember that I never wanted to disappear. Remember that some people get what they want by making their competition vanish." He tried to reassure her, told her she was being paranoid, but Diana had just shaken her head. "I've spent years learning to trust my instincts about people who threaten you while smiling. Tonight, looking into certain eyes, I see someone who's been planning conversations like this for months." Her hands had been trembling as she spoke, Cole remembered. Not from cold, but from fear. "There are people in this family, Adrian, who see me as nothing more than an obstacle to their ambitions. They've made it clear that my continued visibility is problematic for their future plans." She'd gripped his arm then, her fingernails digging in through his uniform sleeve. "Promise me something. If they succeed in silencing me, don't let them rewrite who I was. Don't let them turn me into a footnote in someone else's fairy tale." Cole had promised. A promise he'd kept locked away for 27 years, watching as Diana's memory was slowly sanitized, her inconvenient truths buried beneath official narratives and charitable platitudes. Until today, Cole had filed his concerns through proper channels. They'd been dismissed as overprotective speculation from junior staff who don't understand the complexities of royal relationships. 3 weeks later, Diana was dead in a Paris tunnel. For 27 years, he'd carried that weight. Today, looking across the forecourt, he had the strangest feeling that weight was about to shift. The kind of discipline that looked ceremonial to outsiders. For Cole, it was muscle memory from places where discipline meant survival. His eyes were fixed on that invisible point somewhere past the crowd, the thousandy stare that guards are famous for. Only his wasn't for show. It was the same focus that had kept him alive through 2 tours of duty, where being distracted for even a second could mean not coming home. The motorcade glided through the palace gates with that smooth, practiced precision you only see with royal movements. Dark vehicles, tinted windows, police escorts that somehow managed to look both obvious and discreet. Palace staff moved into position with clipboards and practiced smiles, everyone knowing exactly where they needed to be. The central car came to a gentle stop. A liveried footman approached the rear door, glanced toward the senior protocol officer for the nod, then opened it with a flourish. Queen Camilla stepped out. She wore a tailored navy coat with subtle fur trim at the collar, the kind of expensive simplicity that screams money without being flashy about it. Her hat was positioned at exactly the right angle, her hair neat beneath it, her expression that carefully practiced smile she'd worn to thousands of these events over the years. She moved through the small reception line like she was following choreography. A handshake here, a murmured pleasantry there, a polite nod to the diplomatic guests who'd been waiting in the cold. At the rope barriers, she turned and gave a brief wave to the crowd, generating the expected ripple of cheers and camera clicks. Then her gaze swept across the line of ceremonial guards and stopped. Her eyes settled on Cole, standing motionless with his rifle held in perfect position, and something shifted in her expression. Not obviously, she was too practiced for that, but there was a tightening around her eyes. A pause that lasted just a beat too long, like she'd recognized something she hadn't expected to see, or someone. Cole felt her stare, though his own never wavered from that distant point. 27 years was a long time, but some faces you don't forget, especially when they belong to people who'd made certain promises about what would happen to inconvenient witnesses. The planned route had her moving straight to the palace entrance after greeting the envoy, but halfway there, she did something that made every protocol officer in the forecourt tense up. She changed direction, not dramatically, just a subtle shift in her path that took her away from the reception line and toward the row of guards. Her aides, caught off guard, hurried to adjust their positions. A couple of palace officials exchanged quick glances. This wasn't on the schedule. The crowd noticed immediately. You could feel the shift in energy, that collective intake of breath that happens when people sense something unscripted is about to unfold. Phones that had been lowering rose again. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Camilla walked directly to Cole and stopped in front of him, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look up at him beneath the bare skin. For a moment, neither moved. "I believe a queen is due a salute from her guard sergeant," she said, her voice carrying just far enough for the nearest tourists to hear. Cole didn't blink, couldn't shift. The winter breeze ruffled the plume on his bare skin, but the man beneath it might as well have been made of granite. Her smile didn't waver, but something in her tone sharpened. "Perhaps you didn't hear me. I said, salute your queen." Still nothing. His breathing remained slow and even, eyes locked on that distant point that guards are trained to focus on. The rifle stayed steady in his left hand, his right hand resting in perfect ceremonial position. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Is he allowed to just ignore her?" Another voice answered uncertainly, "I don't think so." Camilla's smile began to look forced. She leaned forward slightly, not enough to break protocol, but enough to make her words carry more weight. "This isn't the time to be stubborn, Sergeant. You're on duty. Do as I've instructed." The silence stretched and stretched until it became its own kind of answer. Behind her, an aide shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward one of the protocol officers, as if asking whether they should intervene. The officer gave the slightest shake of his head. Sometimes you just had to let these moments play out. "A simple salute," Camilla continued, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "That's all I've asked." Show the people that their queen is respected by her guard. The crowd was completely focused now. Even the dignitaries in the reception line had stopped pretending to make small talk, turning to watch the standoff unfolding in the forecourt. Cole remained absolutely motionless. Not defiant, that would have required emotion, just immovable, like he was anchored to something deeper than the cobblestones beneath his feet. And that's when Camilla's patience finally cracked. She straightened to her full height, her voice now pitched for the entire courtyard to hear. Is this how the household division now conducts itself? Standing mute in the face of the crown. Some tourists lowered their phones, suddenly uncomfortable. Others raised them higher, sensing this was turning into something that might end up in tomorrow's headlines. I'm certain, she continued, each word crisp as the winter air, that ceremonial respect is not optional, unless, of course, we've reached the point where protocol means whatever suits the mood of the man in uniform. The aristocratic sharpness was coming through now, the kind of tone honed in drawing rooms, where cutting someone down was an art form. Cole didn't move, not even a twitch. The stillness itself had weight to it, a presence that contrasted sharply with the rising heat in her voice. Near the rope barrier, people were starting to lean forward. This wasn't the polite ceremony they'd expected to watch. A few tourists looked genuinely uncomfortable, like they were witnessing a family argument in public. Others seemed riveted, phones steady in their hands. She tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. I have always respected men who do their duty, but there's a certain kind of man who hides behind rules because he lacks the character to act when respect is owed. That landed like a slap. Not shouted, not crude, but precise. Surgical. At the rope barrier, a middle-aged man in a navy coat muttered, "Bit much, isn't it?" His wife glanced at him but said nothing, though her expression suggested she agreed. An American tourist whispered to her companion, "Is she always like this?" The answer came back quietly, "This isn't normal." Behind Camilla, her lead aide was checking his watch and glancing toward the palace entrance. Whatever was supposed to happen next on the schedule was being delayed by this standoff. Protocol officers were having whispered conversations, trying to decide if they should intervene. Camilla's voice softened, but the edge remained razor-sharp. "You may think this is all theater, Sergeant. Standing in the cold with a gun you'll never fire. But the monarchy runs on traditions like these, and you are here to uphold them, not rewrite them to suit yourself." Crowd's mood was shifting. What had started as curious amusement was becoming something else entirely. People looked uncomfortable now, like they were witnessing something they'd rather not see. Cole's rifle gleamed in the pale sunlight, its polished steel reflecting the gray sky above. His boots, polished to a mirror's shine, didn't move a fraction on the ancient cobblestones. "A guard salutes the sovereign," Camilla said, gesturing toward him with one gloved hand. "A guard salutes those who stand for the sovereign. That is the law of this courtyard, and it has been so for centuries." A younger aide took half a step forward, lowering his voice. "Mom." She didn't look at him. Failure to acknowledge your queen, Sergeant, is failure to acknowledge the very crown you claim to serve. The temperature in the courtyard had shifted from formal to personal, from ceremonial to confrontational. This was no longer about protocol. It was about power, about who would blink first. She took a breath. Her next words delivered like a judge issuing a verdict. Protocol exists to honor the crown, not to serve the egos of men who think themselves above it. The line hung in the cold air, drawing murmurs from the crowd. A woman in a wool scarf whispered to her companion, "He's not going to move." And she was right. He didn't. The pause between them was long enough now that even the dignitaries had stopped pretending this wasn't happening. Every eye in the forecourt fixed on the space between the queen consort and the motionless guardsman. "This is not normal protocol," a French attaché muttered. Camilla's voice cut through the air. "Your behavior disgraces your regiment and the crown. You'll be removed before the hour's out." A woman at the rope barrier called, "He served with my son in Afghanistan." If he isn't saluting, there's a reason. The crowd began taking sides. For the first time, Sergeant Adrian Cole moved, a precise adjustment on his rifle, then spoke without turning his head. "I serve the crown. I do not serve pretenders to it." A gasp rippled. Cole continued, steady and low. "My loyalty was and remains to Diana, Princess of Wales. She served with dignity and for the people. You took her place through deceit, and if not for you, she might still be alive." Tears. Silence. Flags snapped in the wind. Camilla answered, "Icy, I earn my position. Soldiers follow protocol." "Protocol salutes the sovereign," Cole replied. "Respect is earned. Titles can be claimed. Loyalty is earned. Trust isn't owed to those who diminish the memory of those they replace." "You are out of line," she said. "There will be consequences." "Perhaps," he said, "but I won't forget my oath." She turned and withdrew. Aides forming a screen. Orders crackled. Media blackout. Too late. Videos uploaded. Number sign, "Remember Diana Rising." A plainclothes officer moved to quietly relieve Cole. Voices rose. "Leave him. He told the truth." Cole held his post. He knew hearings would follow, perhaps exile from public view. Yet the weight he'd carried felt lighter. Diana's name had been spoken where it mattered. The courtyard exhaled. A veteran offered a salute. Ceremony resumed, altered. Authority can demand attention. Respect must be earned. Sometimes the most powerful act is refusing to move.